Like I said in the last video, if you want to grade your coffee, you need to have a Specialty Coffee Association grading form. There are other cupping scores and grading forms that are used perhaps by a certain coffee company because that's the way they do things. But in terms of coffee quality and what is specialty versus what is not specialty, there's a standard for that. If anything is not specialty, we call it commercial grade. And so there's a commercial fixed priced market for that coffee. But with specialty coffee, you get things that are unique. We reward the growers, we reward the farmers for the work that they've put in and for the higher scoring coffee that they've achieved. So I mentioned earlier that we have this Robusta coffee. The Robusta coffee has a different coffee cupping form. So we won't be comparing that to the Arabica, right? So this grade 1 Ethiopian Yirgacheffe coffee from Saifa is going to score very high. I've had this coffee and it just has that classic, green tea like table grapes, lemongrass. It's just a beautiful cup of coffee, aromatic and sweet and clean. And that's what we look for when we look for something that's specialty. We want it to distinctly stand out with flavors and aromas and fragrances that can be accurately described. The other thing that's great about this coffee, which you'll see in the slides, is that there were no defects. I looked through this coffee, and the best I could do in terms of finding defects is just to find a couple mal-shaped beans. So during the processing, when they have to remove all of the parchment and the coverings, the things that protect the seed from the fruit, maybe the coffee bean gets chipped a little bit. But otherwise, this is a super, super clean coffee. What that means is when the coffee roaster gets it and roast the coffee, it's going to be very easy for them. The size is consistent, the quality is consistent, the ripeness of the coffee cherry and seed was clearly consistent. And so this will roast in a very consistent manner. And then when I open up that fresh roasted bag of coffee, it's going to smell marvelous. There's not going to be any strange or off-putting aromas in it. Now, if I compare that with this old crop Kenya. So I have this Kenya AB coffee, and right here sitting on the top is some significant insect damage. You can kind of see the end of the bean, create some contrast here. The end of the bean was bitten off and there's a little black spot on the end of the bean. That's where an insect bit it. Well, it's not dangerous. This is an agricultural product, and naturally, we used to say on the farm that if the bugs chose it, it must have been the best one, right? It must have been the sweetest. But the problem is when you have insect damage on coffee, then it's already opened. It's broken on the end. And so when I throw that into my roaster, it's going to burn easier because it's been damaged. It's already open. And the heat from my roaster, my coffee roaster, is going to burn this little bean while the rest of it is roasting uniformly and will be sweet and taste like nice coffee. The other thing that's a challenge to this coffee on the coffee cupping form is that when I cup this coffee after I've drank it, it's not really that the coffee was so bad to start with, but the coffee has aged. So this is an older crop of coffee. It's going to be very difficult for this coffee to have the aromas and fragrances that are vibrant and fresh and sweet that it used to. This coffee, I tried it last year and I've tried it this year because it is the 2018 crop and this is 2020. So it's already been 2 years. This coffee has become kind of flat. It's become like the smell of paper or cardboard. It has just this flatness to it. It still has some really nice sweetness like currant and cranberries. When you roast it a little darker, it has this kind of like a plum or peach pie, right? It's like roasted stone fruit or a stewed stone fruit. But it's old. And so it's hard to balance the oldness of this crop. It becomes more like wood and the cellulose materials of these coffee beans. You know, if you think about roasted coffee, so the roasted coffee is very dry. It's been dried out. It's been cooked. All of the moisture and the acids and the proteins that are inside of this coffee seed have been cooked out. So this Kenyan coffee is hard to score above 80 points anymore. That means with age, it can fall into the commodity or commercial market. The commercial grade of coffee below 80 could be an immediate fresh crop that's just been damaged. It just tastes really bad. It was grown poorly. It was harvested poorly, even though it's fresh. Or it could also be a really old crop of coffee. And a lot of people don't understand that in the specialty coffee industry. You spend all this money on a beautiful coffee that, when it was first harvested, was an 88-point coffee. That's a really high score in coffee, 88%. Like if you get a B plus or an A minus in coffee, you're going to get an amazing price for that coffee. But if you let it sit around for 12 months or 18 months or 24 months, it actually becomes really old and it turns woody and stale. So anyway, that's about specialty coffee grading and defects. You know, this Robusta coffee here, I said it was used on a different coffee cupping form than this beautiful Ethiopian. The best that I could find in this Robusta coffee for a defect from India was just a little bit of a couple little insect bites, and that was about it. So this is actually a super, super clean coffee. But this coffee is just an inherently different coffee than all of the Arabicas. So this coffee will have a different form. This Indian Robusta, though, would actually line up much better than this old crop Kenyan. Now, a lot of people would prefer to buy the Kenyan, but the reality is this Kenyan is old and it has defects in it. Now, here, for the last example, on my left right here, I have kind of a yellowish, yellow-green, orange-colored Ethiopian natural processed coffee. We're going to talk about coffee processing. It's still not quite as yellow-brown as the Robusta. This is the Robusta right here. But this Ethiopian coffee, which is natural processed, is going to have more of that yellow color on it. And the yellow color comes from the fruit sugars. So as we talk about coffee processing, we're going to understand what is a natural coffee versus a washed coffee. Because these are actually very similar coffees. This one is an Ethiopian washed, nice and blue-green. This one is an Ethiopian natural. So natural has nothing to do with the opposite, unnatural. Natural is another word used for sun-dried coffee. So imagine picking those coffee cherries off of the tree and then drying them out in the sun. And then once that hard coffee fruit has dried onto the seed, I can just throw it into a machine and crush the fruit off of it. That's what's going to give me this natural or sun-dried coffee. Okay? So natural coffee just means that the fruit was first dried before it was removed from the seed. Whereas this washed coffee, that means immediately after harvesting, the farmers took this coffee to the local mill and they threw it in water. And water started to soak into that coffee fruit, and water started to ferment the coffee fruit. And then when water soaks a coffee cherry, then the fruit easily dissolves and falls off of the coffee seed so that it can be floated and churned and worked through a machine, and then that soft coffee fruit or pulp is removed from the seed. So that's the difference between washed and natural coffee. It's not that one is more clean or one is more natural than the other. It's just a different processing method according to washing with water or natural drying in the sun.